Hello and welcome back to TVP World. My name is Alex Tomlinski and these are World Talks. Now Moldovans will cast their ballots on Sunday in two crucial votes. They are seen as the most consequential in the country's post-Soviet history. One is for the president, the other a referendum on eventual European Union membership, and neither looks to be safe from pro-Russian meddling. Some of those voting have been offered the chance to make a quick buck. A Moldovan oligarch with links to the Kremlin has said he'll pay people for working to elect a Russia-friendly candidate and stop the referendum from passing. And joining us now to discuss this further is Radu Albu-Comănescu, a fellow from Visegrad Insight. Good evening and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening and thank you for having me.
So now, what's at stake in these elections that are to take place on Sunday in Moldova?
Many things, I would say, starting with the very statehood of Moldova, because this is an election that has an impact not only on the European trajectory of Moldova, but also the survival of the state. As we know, Russia is extremely interested in keeping Moldova in the basket of influence, which is quite a strange effort, to be honest, given the fact that there is a war in Ukraine and there is no geographic or a neighborhood contact, territorial contact with the Republic of Moldova. But it would be a success to be presented to the Russian public, or for the sake of Ruski Mir, of course, another country that is faithful to Moscow and stays under our influence. The thing is, not only, as I was saying, not only the European trajectory is important here to be preserved, but the very statehood. What I mean is the fact that Russia has very interesting targeted messages. One is destined, of course, as we know, Russian propaganda goes against the West and against NATO, against the West meaning against the European Union. This is less successful, I would say, because according to the latest polls, Moldovans are in favor of joining the European Union by 55%. But only 31% are actually favoring joining NATO, for instance. There's another message that is sent to the Russophone minority in Moldova, that is, of building a stronger connection to the Russian state and, of course, to the Kremlin, but also, and that is the most dangerous part, are the messages destined to stir up a bit of trouble in Transnistria at one hand, and on the other one in Gagauzia, which are two autonomous and breakaway areas of Moldova that can cause anytime the collapse into a crisis of the Moldovan state.
Mm-hmm. So now, can you tell our viewers a bit more, since you've mentioned it, what is Transnistria and how might it complicate Moldova's EU aspirations?
Transnistria is a breakaway republic. Is basically geographically separated by the river Dniester from the rest of the Republic of Moldova. And as the Republic of Moldova was once part of Romania, we're always keeping an eye on what's happening on the other side of the Prut River, our frontier with them. But this is a breakaway republic that self-proclaimed independent in 1991 and is not recognized by any international forum or the international community, with the exception of Russia. But the problem is that many peaceful finding solutions include Moldova, include Transnistria as an almost equal partner to Chisinau, which means the legitimate Moldova. And therefore, appeasing the situation and finding a way to advance in manners that are corresponding to the territorial integrity of Moldova is very difficult. Russia would like to see this part of Moldova, as well as Gagauzia recently, in a more federate assembly, in a more federal state of Moldova, meaning that Moscow would have instruments, therefore, to control the domestic affairs of Moldova by using Transnistria and Georgia against the government in Chisinau, therefore against them joining the European Union.
Mm-hmm. So now, before we move on, let's take a listen to a soundbite of a Romanian journalist that was recorded by our correspondent in Chisinau.
Shore paid people for vote no at referendum and for a vote for a candidate who will dictated by Moscow.
So now, who is Ilan Shore, and what do we know? How much do we know about Russia meddling in Moldova's democracy and trying to influence the outcome of these elections?
Well, Shore is basically a beautiful oligarch, to put it like that, according to the best traditions of Moscow in the end. And he is is an individual that founded a platform, a group, the Victory Bloc, that is supporting actively Russia and the alliance with Russia. As we know by now, apparently there are some 50,000 supporters of this platform, and therefore 50,000 supporters of his directly, next to the 130,000 individuals that were discovered to have been paid by Russia up to a total of 15 million euros in order to vote for against basically either for a Russian candidate or and against Moldova joining the European Union, basically altering the referendum. What is interesting to know is that 20% of the population of Moldova lives in what statistics call poverty or under the threshold of poverty, and therefore it is very easy to influence with such sums of money the vote, especially when you have the right agents. And as we know, Moldova is still, given the bilingual approach of the public space, both in Romanian and Russian, Moldova is permeable and can be influenced by Russian narratives promoted by the Kremlin against the West and against NATO.
So now, what do you think are the chances of Maya Sandu, the incumbent pro-Western president of Moldova? Just what are her chances of winning once again, and what is she up against?
Well, she has the best chances by now, especially if the pro-European forces are solidary. I would say that, however, it's a bit of a risky business when it comes to who else is going to be on the second place or the third place, because they can reshape the public opinion or the parliamentary elections soon in ways that impact the very functioning of the Moldovan state. Having Maya Sandu unable to work with the parliament, for instance, in ways that address the need of Moldova to join the European Union is going to generate a crisis. And of course, it will take not just time, but lots of negotiations, if this will be successful, to put things back on track. And Moldova cannot afford a political crisis at this time. So there is an interesting thing, by the way. There was another candidate, still is another candidate, Tudor Ulianovsky, who has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Moldova, who is a pro-European solution, a pro-European alternative, but he is maybe less known to the public. And I'm curious, to be honest, if the new president, hopefully, Maya Sandu, will try to work out an alliance with all those figures and all those characters that influence in a European way the democratic evolution of Moldova.
So now, what is it that the West offers Moldova and this particular region and the world? And do you think is that message strong enough?
I hope let's say they formulate the message in ways that are convincing. In what concerns the European Union, as I was saying, there is a certain degree of success. I was mentioning the 55% that are in favor, and this is happening because the youngsters of Moldova and those who also benefited from getting the Romanian citizenship, which is EU citizenship, have access to the European Union, know what the European Union means, and are aware of the financial support that even now is being offered by the European Union to Moldova. That pushed up, for instance, infrastructure development in the last year in certain critical areas. And even the GDP per capita of the Republic of Moldova, after 1 year and a half of free trade with the European Union, managed to increase and overcome, for instance, the GDP per capita of Russia by 20 or 30 euros, which is, of course, not much, but is symbolic in what concerns the power of transformation that a connection with the European Union has. And of course, it's a sort of promise for what the European membership could mean for Moldova.
Mm-hmm. So now, based on what you just said, because I wanted to ask this, can you add anything? What role does the EU play in the life of everyday citizens of Moldova?
Well, I think the European Union is at the beginning for the moment. Of course, there are institutions or policies that are being funded by the European Union now, but they, let's say, they just start. That means that the European Union still needs to build a presence which is more than just let's say, the souvenir or the preference of separate individuals in the electoral spectrum of Moldova. From this moment on, I think Moldova also contributed in many ways to its own establishment of a European identity. Let's think about, for instance, the way Moldova hosted last year the European Political Community Summit, which was already an interesting step to take, and quite daring given the context. So with that success, with the many visits, by the way, paid by EU officials to Chisinau, and by head of state of governments of leading EU countries to Moldova in the last 2 years, I think that the Moldovans feel that they are part of a area closer to the center of European politics. And that may help in building an identity that is finally detached from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Very important indeed. Now, in the case that the results are positive for Maia Sandu, you also mentioned that Romania has parliamentary elections coming up. But let's go back now to these elections. So in the case that Maia Sandu does win and the amending of the constitution does take place, meaning that the referendum is also valid, how do you see this on the timeline? When would we see Moldova become a member of the EU?
Well, it will depend on how powerfully Moldova will engage in negotiating. And I do hope that a team that was set recently by the Moldovan government will be able to take as proficiently as possible the challenge that comes with negotiating every chapter of accession. It may take, I know for sure that Romania is offering counsel, and Romania is highly supportive of this, and not just Romania, but even countries from Western Europe who were initially reluctant to see any enlargement of the European Union, and finally understand that we need in Eastern Europe to define a certain perimeter where Europe stops, and they will contribute, hopefully in ways that will shorten the accession time, and probably, if everything goes properly and the negotiations are closed in 2 or 3 years maximum, maybe that Moldova will be able to join in 5 or 6 years, or like Albania, but that's a bit of a different story, in 2030, 2031 the latest, I would say.
All right. And we're going to have to end it right there. Radu Albu-Comănescu, fellow from Visegrad Insight, thank you very much for speaking to us here on TVP World tonight.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And with that, we conclude these World Talks. But as always, do stay tuned to TVP World for more interviews like this one, breaking news and commentary. Thanks for watching.